My toxic boss stole my $1 million project and put his name on it. So, I went straight to the regional director and destroyed his entire career. My boss stole my pitch, so I pitched it to his boss first. Chapter 1. You know that feeling when you finally finish something that is going to change your entire life. I was staring at my monitor at 3:00 a.m., my eyes burning from the harsh blue light of the screen. The office was completely dead, silent except for the low hum of the air conditioning. 6 months. For 6 grueling months, I had sacrificed my weekends, my sleep, and my sanity for one single project. I had missed my best friend's wedding for this. I had lived on stale coffee and vending machine protein bars. I called it Project Apex. It wasn't just a regular corporate presentation filled with meaningless buzzwords. It was a complete structural overhaul that would save our logistics division over $4 million in the very first year. And I, Elias Thorne, a mid-level strategic analyst who usually blended into the gray cubicle walls, was the sole architect of it. I took a deep breath, listening to the silence of the empty building. Tomorrow was the big day. Tomorrow, I was going to present this to the regional board and finally secure the promotion I desperately deserved. But first, it had to go through him, Donovan Reed. Donovan was my direct manager, and on the surface, he was the golden boy of the corporate floor. He wore custom Italian suits, had a smile that could disarm a hostile negotiator, and always knew exactly what to say to upper management. But behind closed doors, Donovan was a parasite. He didn't build things, he didn't innovate. He attached himself to the people who did, draining their talent and presenting it as his own brilliant leadership. Up until now, I had played the game. I let him take minor credits for my quarterly reports, thinking it was just the cost of doing business in a cutthroat firm. But Project Apex was different. This was my golden ticket out of the cubicle and into the executive suite. I had explicitly told Donovan that I wanted to lead the pitch. And surprisingly, he had agreed. "Elias, my boy, this is your baby," he had said just yesterday, patting my shoulder with that perfectly manicured hand of his. "I just need you to send me the final master file tonight so I can review the formatting before we show it to Harrison Cole." Harrison Cole, the regional director, the man who held the power to promote me on the spot or fire me with a flick of his pen. So, like a trusting fool, I clicked send. I watched the progress bar fill up, sending the master file directly to Donovan's inbox. A wave of relief washed over me as I packed up my briefcase and headed out into the cold night air. I went home, crashed onto my bed, and slept for the first time in weeks without dreaming about spreadsheets. The next morning, I arrived at the office at 7:30 a.m., dressed in my best suit, my heart pounding with anticipation. The board meeting was scheduled for 10:00 a.m. in the main executive suite. I walked over to Donovan's glass-walled office to go over the final talking points, but his door was locked. The lights were off. Frowning, I pulled out my phone and saw an email from him, sent at 6:00 a.m. The subject line made my blood run instantly cold. Project Apex pitch canceled. My hands started to shake as I opened the email. "Elias, unfortunately, upper management felt the timing wasn't right for Apex. We are pulling it from today's agenda. Take the day off, you've earned some rest. Donovan." I stood there in the middle of the hallway, feeling like the floor had just dropped out from under me. 6 months of my life, deleted in a 2-line email. But something didn't make sense. Donovan was ambitious, dangerously so. He would never just let a $4 million saving initiative die without a fight, unless he wasn't letting it die at all. I rushed back to my desk and booted up my computer. I logged into the company's shared network drive, navigating to the secure folder where the master presentation was stored. The file was still there, but the metadata had changed. It showed that it had been modified just an hour ago. My heart hammering against my ribs, I opened the file. The title slide loaded on my screen. The beautiful, sleek design I had spent hours perfecting was still exactly the same. The financial projections were exactly the same. But right there at the bottom of the slide, where my name had been proudly displayed at 3:00 a.m., there was now a different name, presented by Donovan Reed. He hadn't canceled the pitch, he had canceled me. He was going to walk into that boardroom at 10:00 a.m., look Harrison Cole in the eye, and steal my entire future. A cold, dark anger started to build in the pit of my stomach. Donovan thought I was just a quiet analyst who would pack up his things and go home crying. He was wrong. I wasn't going to let him take this from me. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 7:45 a.m. I had exactly 2 hours and 15 minutes to destroy Donovan Reed before he even walked into that room. Chapter 2. Panic is a useless emotion in the corporate world. It clouds your judgment and makes you an easy target. If I stormed into the HR department right now, it would be my word against his. Donovan was a senior manager with a silver tongue and a decade of built-up corporate goodwill. He played golf with the executives and knew the names of their children. I was just a spreadsheet jockey, a faceless name on a payroll roster. If I confronted him directly at the 10:00 a.m. meeting, he would just play the victim. He would look at the board with fake sympathy and say I was an overworked employee having a severe mental breakdown. He might even suggest I take a leave of absence for my own health. No, a frontal assault would be corporate suicide. If I wanted to take down a snake, I had to cut off the head before it could strike. I stared at the stolen presentation on my screen, my mind racing through every possible scenario. That was when I remembered a tiny, seemingly insignificant detail about Harrison Cole. Harrison was a creature of absolute, ruthless habit. While the rest of the executive board rolled in at 9:30 a.m., Harrison always arrived exactly at 8:15 a.m. He spent the first hour of his day in his corner office on the 50th floor, drinking black coffee and reviewing the day's agenda. Alone. No secretary, no gatekeepers, no interruptions allowed. It was a strict rule that everyone in the building knew and feared. Interrupting Harrison Cole during his golden hour was a fireable offense. People had been terminated on the spot for walking in with the wrong paperwork before 9:00 a.m. But right now, getting fired was the least of my worries. I quickly opened the hidden metadata of my original file. I pulled the digital access logs, proving exactly when the file was created, who created it, and the exact second Donovan had logged in to change the author name. I printed the entire document, making sure the timestamp from 3:00 a.m. and my author credentials were watermarked on every single page. I grabbed the thick stack of papers, still warm from the printer, and shoved them into a sleek black binder. I checked my watch. It was 8:05 a.m. My hands were sweating as I walked toward the executive elevator. I swiped my badge, praying that my mid-level access hadn't been revoked by Donovan yet. The light flashed green. The elevator doors slid shut, sealing me inside a steel box that was shooting straight up to the lion's den. My reflection in the mirrored walls looked pale, but my eyes were burning with a desperate kind of fire. When the doors chimed open on the 50th floor, the silence was deafening. Thick carpet absorbed my footsteps as I walked down the long, mahogany-paneled hallway. At the very end of the corridor stood the double oak doors of Harrison Cole's office. Through the frosted glass, I could see the silhouette of the man himself, sitting behind a massive desk. My heart was beating so hard, I could hear it echoing in my ears. If I opened that door, there was no going back. I gripped the black binder so tightly my knuckles turned white. I didn't knock. Knocking gives them the opportunity to say no. I turned the brass handle and pushed the door open. Harrison Cole slowly looked up from his morning report, his piercing gray eyes locking onto mine. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He didn't yell, he didn't ask who I was. He just looked at the clock on his desk, then looked back at me with a stare that could cut through solid steel. You have exactly 1 minute to explain why you are in my office at 8:20 in the morning, Harrison said, his voice dangerously quiet. And depending on your answer, security will either escort you back to your desk or out of this building permanently. I swallowed the hard lump of fear in my throat. I stepped forward, placing the black binder directly onto the center of his pristine desk. My name is Elias Thorne, I said, forcing my voice to stay dead steady. And I am here to save you $4 million before Donovan Reed walks into your boardroom and lies to your face. Harrison's eyes shifted from my face down to the black binder. The silence in the room stretched out, thick and suffocating. Chapter 3. Harrison Cole didn't blink. He didn't reach for the phone to call security, which meant I had somehow survived the first 10 seconds. Instead, he reached out with agonizing slowness and flipped open the black binder. I stood frozen, watching his eyes scan the first page, tracking the rapid, precise movement of his pupils. The only sound in the massive office was the heavy ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. $4 million, Harrison repeated, his voice devoid of any warmth or emotion. That is a very bold number for a man who just broke my most sacred rule, Mr. Thorne. It's not a guess, sir, I replied, forcing my legs to stop trembling and standing my ground. It is a mathematical certainty, backed by 6 months of relentless logistical data analysis. I leaned forward slightly, pointing a shaking finger at the second page of the document. I call it Project Apex. It completely restructures our regional supply chain, eliminating the deadweight routing that has been bleeding our Q3 profits dry. Harrison turned the page, his expression completely unreadable, like a poker player holding a royal flush. And you are telling me Donovan Reed is going to present this today? He asked softly. Yes, sir, I said, the anger finally overpowering my fear. But he is going to present it with his name plastered on the title slide. I reached over and confidently flipped to the appendix section at the very back of the binder. Here are the digital access logs pulled directly from our secure network drive. You will see that I created the master file, built every single financial model, and finalized the deck at 3:00 a.m. today. At 6:00 a.m., Donovan sent me an email stating that upper management had canceled the pitch entirely. I placed a printed copy of Donovan's lying email right on top of the financial charts. And at exactly 6:45 a.m., Donovan accessed the secure folder, changed the author metadata to his own name, and saved a new copy. Harrison stared at the email, a dangerous, dark shadow crossing his weathered face. He hated incompetence, but he absolutely despised corporate theft. But Harrison Cole didn't get to the top of the food chain by just trusting a piece of paper handed to him by a desperate analyst. He closed the binder with a sharp snap that echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. Anyone can print out a metadata log or spoof a timestamp, Elias, Harrison said, leaning back in his heavy leather chair. If you really built this massive infrastructure change, prove it to me right now. He crossed his arms, instantly transforming into the ruthless interrogator that made even senior executives sweat. On page 12, you suggest rerouting the Midwest distribution hubs. Tell me exactly how that impacts our vendor contracts in Chicago without looking at the binder. He was testing me. If Donovan had been asked that question, he would have stumbled, stuttered, and deflected, because Donovan only read the summary slides. But I didn't just read the data, I lived it. It doesn't impact the Chicago contracts at all, I answered without missing a single beat. Because we invoke the tertiary clause in Section 4 of the vendor agreement, shifting the load to the Detroit hub during off-peak hours. That reduces transit tariffs by 18% and completely bypasses the Chicago bottleneck. Harrison's eyes narrowed slightly, a microscopic glimmer of respect flashing in his cold gray eyes. He fired another question, faster this time. What about the union pushback on the adjusted driver schedules? Already accounted for in the Q4 budget allocation. I fired back instantly, the numbers flowing from my brain like second nature. By offering a 2% premium on night shift routes, we maintain compliance and still net a $2 million saving on overtime pay. For the first time since I walked into the room, the corner of Harrison's mouth twitched upward. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was the closest thing to it. He opened the binder again, looking at the title slide with Donovan's name digitally pasted over mine. Donovan has been presenting his brilliant ideas to this board for 2 years now, Harrison murmured, almost speaking to himself. I always wondered why he could never answer my deep technical questions during the Q&A sessions. Harrison looked up at me, the coldness in his eyes now entirely directed at the man who had tried to play him for a fool. Donovan thinks he is going to walk into my boardroom at 10 o'clock and claim your crown, Elias. He thinks he has successfully buried you in the shadows. Harrison stood up, buttoning his tailored suit jacket with slow, deliberate precision. I despise liars, but I despise men who steal from their own team even more. He walked around the massive mahogany desk and stood right in front of me. Go back to your desk, Elias. Act completely normal, look defeated if you have to, and do exactly as Donovan instructed. Panic flared in my chest for a split second. Sir, you want me to just let him present it? I asked, my voice betraying a sudden hint of confusion. Harrison Cole finally smiled, and it was a terrifying, predatory thing to witness. Oh, I am definitely going to let him present it. I want him to stand in front of the entire executive board and dig his own grave with his own mouth. And when he is completely finished, when he is standing at the absolute peak of his stolen glory. Harrison tapped the black binder with his index finger. That is when I am going to call you into the room to bury him. Chapter 4. Walking back to my desk felt like floating in a bizarre, slow-motion dream. The fluorescent lights of the bullpen buzzed above me, casting long shadows across the gray corporate carpet. Everything looked exactly the same as it had an hour ago, but the entire world had shifted on its axis. I sat down in my cheap ergonomic chair, staring blankly at my screensaver, knowing I had to play the part perfectly. I slumped my shoulders, rubbed my tired eyes, and let my face fall into a mask of total, crushing defeat. At 8:45 a.m., the elevator doors chimed, and Donovan Reed strolled onto the floor like a conquering king. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery without buying a ticket. His custom navy blue suit was perfectly pressed, his hair styled to immaculate, untouchable perfection. He held a premium artisanal coffee in one hand and a sleek leather portfolio in the other. The portfolio that contained my life's work, my sleepless nights, and my future. I watched from the shadows of my cubicle as he walked down the main aisle, greeting people with that fake, dazzling smile. When he saw me sitting at my desk, he actually had the absolute nerve to walk over. Elias, buddy, you're still here, Donovan asked, his voice dripping with synthetic, sickening sympathy. I thought I told you to take the day off and get some much-needed rest. I looked up at him, forcing my eyes to look heavy, tired, and completely broken. I just had some routine emails to finish up, Donovan, I muttered, looking away to hide the burning anger in my eyes. I'm really disappointed about Project Apex being canceled by the board. Donovan let out a heavy, theatrical sigh and rested his manicured hand on my cubicle wall. I know, Elias, I know, he said, shaking his head as if he truly shared my deep professional pain. Management just doesn't have the vision for such radical changes right now. But don't worry, your hard work wasn't totally for nothing. I'll make sure to salvage some of your raw data for the Q4 review so you get a little recognition. It took every ounce of self-control in my entire body not to reach across the desk and grab him by his expensive silk tie. He was standing right in front of me, lying to my face with absolute sociopathic ease. "Thanks, Donovan," I whispered, staring down at my keyboard. "You're a good boss." "We're a team, Elias," he smiled, patting my shoulder condescendingly before turning away. "Now go home, get some sleep, and leave the complex corporate politics to me." I watched him walk into his glass office, completely oblivious to the fact that he was a dead man walking. The digital clock on my computer screen ticked forward, mocking my anxiety. 9:00 a.m. 9:30 a.m. At 9:45 a.m., Donovan emerged from his office, adjusting his tie and checking his reflection in the glass door. He picked up the leather portfolio and headed straight for the executive boardroom at the end of the hall. The 10:00 a.m. meeting had officially begun. I sat in my cubicle, staring at the clock, counting every single agonizing second. My stomach was tied in 1,000 tight knots, acid burning in my throat. What if Harrison Cole changed his mind and decided to just accept the presentation? What if Donovan was somehow smooth enough to talk his way through the complex data without getting caught? The minutes crawled by like hours, each tick of the clock echoing in my silent workspace. 10:15 a.m. 10:30 a.m. I imagined Donovan standing at the head of that massive mahogany table, clicking through my meticulously designed slides. I imagined him soaking up the nods of approval from the senior vice presidents, stealing my glory piece by piece. Then, at exactly 10:42 a.m., my desk phone rang. The sudden, sharp noise made me jump violently in my chair. I stared at the glowing caller ID on the small digital display. It was the executive boardroom extension. I picked up the receiver, my hand trembling slightly as I brought it to my ear. "Elias Thorne speaking," I said, my voice tight and breathless. "Mr. Thorne," came the crisp, professional voice of Harrison Cole's executive assistant. "Mr. Cole requests your presence in the main boardroom immediately. Bring a notepad." "I'm on my way," I replied, hanging up the phone with a definitive click. This was it. The trap had been perfectly set, the bait had been greedily swallowed, and now it was time to drop the heavy steel cage. I stood up, smoothed out the wrinkles in my jacket, and walked toward the executive wing with long, purposeful strides. I didn't feel like a quiet, invisible mid-level analyst anymore. I felt like an executioner walking to the chopping block. I reached the heavy double doors of the boardroom, taking one final, deep breath to steady my racing heart. Through the thick wood, I could hear Donovan's voice, loud, charismatic, and full of arrogant confidence. I reached out, grasped the cold brass handles, and pushed the doors wide open. Chapter 5. The heavy oak doors swung open, the quiet click of the latch echoing like a gunshot in the massive room. Every single head at the long mahogany table turned to look at me simultaneously. There were 12 senior executives in the room, wearing tailored suits and expressions of mild irritation at the sudden interruption. At the head of the table sat Harrison Cole, his face an impenetrable mask of cold authority. And standing at the front of the room, illuminated by the harsh glow of the projector screen, was Donovan Reed. Behind him, projected in massive, bold letters, was my title slide. Project Apex, Supply Chain Restructuring, presented by Donovan Reed. Donovan froze mid-sentence, his laser pointer hovering uselessly over a complex financial graph that he didn't actually understand. His perfectly styled hair seemed to lose a bit of its bounce as his eyes locked onto mine. For a fraction of a second, I saw pure, unadulterated panic flash across his handsome face. But Donovan was a professional survivor, a corporate chameleon who could adapt to almost any disaster. He quickly recovered, flashing his trademark $1 million smile at the board members before turning to me with a look of condescending pity. "Elias, what are you doing in here?" Donovan asked, his tone dripping with fake, gentle concern. "I thought we discussed this morning that you needed to take a personal day for your mental fatigue." He looked back at the executives, tapping his temple subtly with one finger, silently implying that I was having a severe nervous breakdown. "Please return to your desk, Elias. We are in the middle of a high-level executive briefing." I didn't move a single inch. I just stood there, my hands resting calmly at my sides, staring a hole right through his expensive Italian suit. Before I could even open my mouth to speak, the deep, commanding voice of Harrison Cole cut through the tension. "I asked Mr. Thorne to join us, Donovan," Harrison said, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the polished mahogany table. "Since Project Apex is such a massive, radical shift in our regional operations, I thought it would be beneficial to have a senior analyst take notes." Donovan's smile tightened, the corners of his mouth straining against his suddenly pale cheeks. "Of course, Harrison, whatever you think is best," Donovan replied smoothly, though I could see a bead of sweat forming on his temple. He turned back to the screen, desperately trying to regain control of the room. "As I was just explaining to the board, my vision for Apex is to streamline the mid-level distribution hubs to maximize Q3 output." He clicked to the next slide, revealing a dense heat map of logistics routes that had taken me 3 agonizing weeks to compile. "By synergizing our cross-platform deliverables, we can achieve a dynamic cost reduction across the board." It was a beautiful, flawless sentence, made entirely of meaningless corporate garbage. Harrison Cole didn't even look at the projector screen. He kept his piercing gray eyes locked directly on Donovan, like a hawk watching a field mouse. "Synergizing deliverables is a fascinating concept, Donovan," Harrison said, his voice dangerously quiet and polite. "But let's skip the marketing pitch and get down to the actual mathematics." Donovan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously above his tightly knotted silk tie. "I'm looking at your proposed changes to the Midwest routing schedules on page 12, Harrison continued, opening the printed deck in front of him. I knew exactly what was coming, and a cold thrill of anticipation ran down my spine. "If we implement this aggressive timeline, how exactly does it impact our tertiary vendor contracts in Chicago?" The entire boardroom went dead silent. 12 pairs of executive eyes shifted from Harrison to Donovan, waiting for the brilliant architect of Project Apex to answer the question. Donovan stared blankly at Harrison, his mind frantically searching for a lifeline that simply didn't exist. He looked at the slide, desperately trying to decipher the complex web of data points that I had meticulously coded at 2 in the morning. "Well, Harrison, the Chicago contracts are. They are certainly a variable that we need to monitor closely," Donovan stammered, his smooth voice suddenly cracking. "My overarching strategy is to maintain a fluid dialogue with the vendors to ensure mutual alignment during the transition phase." A few of the board members frowned, exchanging confused glances with each other. Harrison let out a slow, heavy sigh that sounded like a judge preparing to deliver a death sentence. "That is a very long way of saying you have absolutely no idea, Donovan," Harrison said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. Donovan's face turned a violent shade of red, his charismatic facade finally cracking under the immense, crushing pressure. "Sir, the data is highly complex, and I wanted to keep this presentation focused on the macro-level vision." "Mr. Thorne," Harrison interrupted, not even looking in my direction. "Since you are just here to take notes, perhaps you could enlighten the board on the Chicago vendor contracts." I stepped forward, moving out of the shadows by the door and into the bright, unforgiving light of the boardroom. I looked directly at Donovan Reed, watching his entire world begin to crumble into dust. "It doesn't impact the Chicago contracts at all," I said, my voice ringing out clear and strong. "Because Section 4 of the vendor agreement allows us to shift the load to the Detroit hub during off-peak hours, reducing transit tariffs by 18%. Chapter 6. The silence that followed my answer was so profound, you could hear the projector's cooling fans spinning. 12 senior executives turned their heads back and forth between me and Donovan, the realization slowly dawning on their faces. Donovan's mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish pulled fresh from the water. He gripped the edges of the wooden podium so hard his knuckles turned completely white. A drop of sweat rolled down his forehead, ruining his perfectly manicured appearance. "Yes, well, that is exactly what my data suggests," Donovan stammered, desperately trying to reclaim the narrative. "Elias has obviously been reviewing my preliminary notes, which I appreciate, but as the project lead." "You are not the project lead, Donovan." Harrison Cole's voice sliced through the room like a freshly sharpened guillotine blade. The regional director stood up slowly, picking up a thick black binder from the table. It was the exact same binder I had placed on his desk at 8:20 this morning. Harrison tossed it onto the center of the mahogany table, the heavy thud making several board members flinch. "I have spent the last 2 hours reviewing the true origins of Project Apex," Harrison said, his eyes locked onto Donovan. "And it appears that your only actual contribution to this $4 million initiative was changing the author's name on the title slide." A collective gasp rippled through the boardroom, the kind of sound you usually only hear in a courtroom when a guilty verdict is read. The vice president of operations leaned forward, glaring at Donovan with pure disgust. Donovan took a physical step back, bumping into the projector screen and casting a warped shadow across the financial data. "Harrison, sir, there must be some kind of massive misunderstanding," Donovan pleaded, his charismatic voice now a high-pitched whine. "Elias is a junior analyst who has been struggling with his workload and his mental health. He has been trying to take credit for my departmental strategies for months now." It was a bold, disgusting lie, a final desperate roll of the dice from a cornered rat. But Harrison Cole didn't even blink. He simply opened the black binder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "This is an email you sent to Mr. Thorne at exactly 6:00 a.m. this morning," Harrison read, holding the paper up for the board to see. "You explicitly told him that upper management had canceled this very pitch, and you instructed him to take the day off. Why would you tell your subordinate the pitch was canceled, Donovan, when you were scheduled to present it to us at 10 o'clock? Donovan's eyes darted wildly around the room, looking for a friendly face, an ally, anyone who would throw him a rope. But the executives were staring at him with absolute, freezing contempt. In the corporate world, stealing is a sin, but getting caught lying to the regional director is an immediate death sentence. I was trying to protect him," Donovan choked out, sweating profusely through his expensive suit. "The data was raw, and I didn't want him to embarrass himself in front of the board." Harrison didn't yell, but the quiet menace in his voice was infinitely more terrifying. "The data wasn't raw, Donovan. The data is flawless. And according to the network access logs in this binder, you logged into the secure drive at 6:45 a.m., 45 minutes after you told Elias the project was dead." Harrison pulled out the second piece of paper, the digital footprint that proved the ultimate betrayal. "You opened his master file, deleted his name, typed in your own, and saved it. You didn't write a single line of code, you didn't run a single financial model, and you didn't build this presentation." Harrison leaned forward, resting his hands on the table, his eyes burning with absolute authority. "You are nothing but a parasite wearing a custom suit." Donovan opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His entire career, his reputation, his carefully constructed empire of lies had just been incinerated in less than 5 minutes. I stood by the door, watching the man who had tried to destroy my future completely disintegrate in front of my eyes. The satisfaction I felt wasn't just sweet, it was intoxicating. But Harrison Cole wasn't quite finished yet. He turned his gaze away from the broken shell of Donovan Reed and looked directly at me. Chapter 7. Harrison Cole's piercing gray eyes locked onto mine, completely ignoring the sweating, trembling mess that was Donovan Reed. The entire boardroom shifted their focus to me, the silent, invisible analyst who had just orchestrated the public execution of a senior manager. I stood tall, keeping my face perfectly neutral, refusing to show a single ounce of the adrenaline pumping through my veins. "Mr. Thorne," Harrison said, his voice echoing in the absolute silence of the room. "This binder contains 6 months of the most comprehensive logistical restructuring I have seen in my entire tenure at this company." He tapped the thick stack of papers with his index finger, a gesture of profound respect from a man who respected almost no one. "You identified the bleeding arteries in our supply chain, you formulated a brilliant cure, and you backed it up with bulletproof mathematics." Harrison paused, letting the weight of his words sink into the minds of the 12 senior executives sitting at the table. "And you did it all while working under a manager who actively tried to suppress your talent and steal your future." He turned his head slightly, shooting a final, disgust-filled glare at Donovan, who was now staring blankly at the floor. "Security is on their way up to this floor right now, Donovan," Harrison stated coldly. "They will escort you to your office, give you exactly 10 minutes to pack your personal belongings, and then they will walk you out the front door." Donovan flinched as if he had been physically struck across the face. "Harrison, please, I have given 10 years of my life to this firm," Donovan begged, his voice cracking with pathetic desperation. "You can't just throw me out like this over one misunderstanding." "It is not a misunderstanding, it is corporate theft," Harrison fired back, his tone absolute and final. "And as of this exact second, you are officially terminated for cause, which means your severance package and your unvested stock options are completely void." Donovan let out a strangled gasp, the realization of his total financial ruin finally hitting him. He looked at the board members, hoping for a shred of sympathy, but they all looked away, disgusted by the stench of his failure. 2 burly security guards in dark suits suddenly appeared in the doorway behind me. They didn't say a word, they just stepped into the room and flanked Donovan on either side. "Mr. Reed, it's time to go," the taller guard said, his hand resting firmly on Donovan's shoulder. Donovan looked at me one last time, his eyes filled with a toxic mixture of hatred, shock, and utter defeat. He opened his mouth to say something, but the security guards practically dragged him out of the room before he could speak. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind them, sealing Donovan Reed's fate forever. The boardroom was quiet again, the heavy, oppressive tensions slowly lifting from the air. Harrison Cole let out a long breath and sat back down in his leather chair. He looked around the table at the silent executives, his expression returning to its usual, calculating calm. "Now that the trash has been taken out," Harrison said smoothly, "we have a $4 million logistical overhaul to discuss." He gestured toward the empty podium at the front of the room, the projector still displaying my title slide. "Mr. Thorne, since you are the sole architect of Project Apex, I suggest you take the floor and walk us through your vision." My heart leaped into my throat, but my legs moved forward with steady, confident purpose. I walked past the long mahogany table, feeling the eyes of the most powerful people in the company watching my every move. I reached the podium, gripped the edges with both hands, and looked out at the sea of expectant faces. This was the moment I had sacrificed my sleep, my weekends, and my sanity for. I didn't need notes, I didn't need flashcards, and I didn't need Donovan Reed to speak for me ever again. "Thank you, Mr. Cole," I said, my voice strong and unwavering. I picked up the laser pointer, clicked to the next slide, and began to change my life. Chapter 8. The presentation lasted exactly 45 minutes. I didn't stumble, I didn't hesitate, and I answered every single aggressive question the board threw at me with absolute precision. When I finally clicked to the last slide, detailing the projected Q4 profit margins, the room was completely silent. Then, slowly, the vice president of operations began to clap. Soon, the entire executive board joined in, the sound of their applause echoing loudly in the massive mahogany room. Harrison Cole didn't clap, but he gave me a single, approving nod that was worth more than a standing ovation. "Brilliant work, Elias," Harrison said, closing the black binder and folding his hands on the table. "We are greenlighting Project Apex immediately, and you will be given full autonomy and a dedicated team to execute it." He paused, a rare, genuine smile touching the corners of his mouth. "And since the position of senior logistics manager is now unexpectedly vacant, I believe you have just earned yourself a very large office and a substantial pay raise." I walked out of that boardroom 2 hours later as a completely different man. I wasn't the invisible analyst in the gray cubicle anymore. I was the youngest senior manager in the history of the regional division. As I walked back to my desk to pack my things for my new corner office, the bullpen was buzzing with whispered rumors. Everyone had seen security escort Donovan Reed out of the building with nothing but a cardboard box. The golden boy had fallen, and he had fallen hard. I later heard that Donovan tried to sue the company for wrongful termination, but Harrison Cole buried him in a mountain of digital evidence. Donovan's reputation in the industry was completely destroyed. No reputable firm would ever hire a manager who had been fired for stealing a subordinate's work and lying to a regional director. He had spent his entire career climbing on the backs of others, and when he finally fell, there was no one left to catch him. As for me, Project Apex was a massive success, saving the company even more money than I had originally projected. I built a team of talented, hardworking analysts, and I made a personal vow to never treat them the way Donovan had treated me. I made sure every single person on my team got full credit for their ideas, their late nights, and their brilliance. Because true leadership isn't about stealing the spotlight, it's about building a stage for your team to shine. Donovan Reed made the fatal mistake of confusing my silence for weakness. He thought that because I was quiet, because I put my head down and did the work, I was an easy target. But what he didn't understand is that the quiet ones are always the most dangerous. While the loud, arrogant people are busy bragging and plotting, the quiet ones are watching, learning, and preparing. Never let anyone take credit for your hard work, your sacrifices, or your late nights. If someone tries to steal your crown, don't just complain about it. Gather your evidence, sharpen your sword, and take it straight to the king. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't screaming or fighting. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply being one step ahead, waiting in the shadows for the perfect moment to strike. Welcome to DramaVerse, Hidden Power Betrayal Stories, where every story reveals the hidden strength behind the people others choose to underestimate. If you enjoyed this story about corporate betrayal, justice, and the power of knowing your worth, please subscribe for more cinematic storytelling. Every story has a twist,